Good afternoon, everyone. To continue our commissioner marathon this afternoon, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Valdis Dombrovskis, who is Commissioner for Economy and Productivity, Implementation and Simplification, to join us in conversation today. So, Commissioner, let's take a seat. Now, you are an old hand in Brussels, a steady hand in Brussels, and have had many positions here over decades. And in the conversations that we've had over today, and actually at dinner last night, we talked about the evolution of the single market and the European project. I think that we're all very quick to criticize shortcomings, and we'll talk about areas for improvement in just a second. But it's often overlooked how far European institutions have come and how much they have managed crisis. So, my first question to you, sir, is, how has the role of the Commission and the European institutions evolved since you first came to this city?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this invitation to Transatlantic Forum. It's a pleasure to be here. On the role of EU institutions, I would say that maybe not the role of EU institutions have evolved so much, because our role is, in any case, in tandem with member states to address challenges the European Union is facing and to work to preserve our values, our interests, our way of life. And that's what we are consistently doing as also European Commission. So what has changed over the decades is that there are many different challenges and issues we had to face, and a geopolitical situation is just getting more complicated. For example, European Union until quite recently was not active in area of defense, because traditionally EU was, so to say, started as a peace project to prevent the return of the war on the European continent. But now, unfortunately, we do have a war on the European continent. So as a EU, we have to reassess our role, and actually now we're engaging very actively in the area of security and defense. And actually for this mandate of European Commission, we have defined security and defense and competitiveness of European economy as two overarching priorities.
Would you say in that sense that the Commission has become a more powerful executive arm?
It's always so that there is this saying that European Union is evolving through a crisis. And it is a different kind of crisis which force us as European Union member states to work together to respond to the issues in a coordinated manner. And yes, that means delegating also new competences, new tasks to European Commission.
Now, it's fascinating also just to sort of follow these developments. I would agree that there is a tendency to see Brussels as much more powerful, not only as a peace project, but also as an instrument of global power, right? And I think sometimes we underestimate that. But how has the role of the United States in this picture changed?
First of all, it has to be said that EU and US are strategic allies. We are also each other's largest trade and investment partners, and especially in a current, more conflictual geopolitical situation where autocracies are trying to assert themselves. It is very important that we as democratic countries are working together. So this is, in a sense, a message and approach with which we are engaging with the US, also with the current President Trump administration. At the same time, we also know that from President Trump there is an emphasis that Europe needs to do much more for its own security and defense, and that's acknowledged. And Indeed, recently from the EU side we came with a major new initiatives like Rearm EU and Readiness 2030 initiative to very substantially increase our defense spending by aiming to increase it by some 800 billion euros over the course of next 4 years.
It certainly is a big step. I remember myself discussing with my own EU counterparts what the nascent efforts at PESCO and trying to put together a defense identity for the EU, but of course we're in a whole other different league. Do you think that, you know, we had the U.S. permanent representative to NATO here, and just a few minutes ago also to the European Union. Do you think that Americans perceive the European Commission as a defense actor?
Well, I would say increasingly so, because it's also true that European Union and European Commission is just over the last few years active in this area, so we're also still shaping up how all those things are working institutionally within the European Union, because many of those initiatives are previously unprecedented, and obviously we continue this very close and very intensive engagement also with the US on this. Of course, there it's worth noting that there's also a certain division of competences, so to say, and we also need to respect the competences and prerogatives of NATO as an organization, but I would say on this we are on a good track.
Well, in a lot of ways, the Commission has a lot to do with the money, right? And the money is important for defense.
Well, that's why I was mentioning this Rearm Europe Readiness 2030 initiative and this aim to mobilize additional 800 billion euros. And more recently, we also announced new initiatives specifically for the EU's eastern flank, because we know that the threat actually comes from the east. So the Eastern Flank Watch and the Wall of Drones initiative to have a proper detection and interception capacities at our eastern borders.
Of course, we shouldn't overlook the fact that you yourself are from an eastern flank country. When you talk about the security environment and quote unquote what needs to be done, do you use different terminology within the Brussels bubble, or and speaking with international counterparts, with Americans? And when you go home, because of course you were a national leader before coming here, do you need to use a different frame of reference? Do the Latvians want to hear something else from you than Americans versus your colleagues in the College of Commissioners?
Well, I'm not a particularly big believer in this concept of, targeted messaging to different audiences, because nowadays whatever you say is global, and every audience can read and see whatever you are saying to some other audience. So I think here it's important to be consistent. But indeed, in Latvia and Baltic states in general, in EU's eastern flank in general, this sense of urgency and sense of danger which is coming from Russia is felt much more acutely than maybe if you are far away from Russian borders. And for many years, in a sense, Baltic states were warning also other EU member states on, different activities which Russia is undertaking and the risks what it is posing, and often it has been seen as, alarmist and so. But since 2022, this has changed, and in a sense. The Western Europe is listening what the eastern flank countries have to say on Russia, and it's important that we respond here in a spirit of European solidarity, because that's key. It's entire EU's eastern border, so the eastern flank countries cannot be left just alone dealing with with their problems, especially in a situation as threatening as it is now, with Russia continuing and, if anything, escalating its war in Ukraine. And also openly threatening invasion of other countries, including EU and NATO countries.
Would you say that at home the fear is acute of it?
Well, certainly concern is felt much more acutely, and also if you look at the recent provocations, incursions of drones, violation of the airspace also by Russian fighter planes, and so on and so forth. Obviously, this is all of a major concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you, of course, do have European forces stationed as part of Enhanced Forward Presence, and so there is the sort of the raising the European awareness in that front. Of course, Teresa Ribera comes from the country that seems to not acknowledge the NATO spending targets. It's a guns versus butter question, but of course the conversations that you have here lead to comity on this issue. But away from security for a second, we'd like to blame red tape for a lot of things, and we've gone through a couple of the conversations we've just had have been about competitiveness issues, US versus Europe versus China. I am a firm believer in the simplification agenda, but as a former regulator myself, I believe in regulation, and don't think that ripping everything to shreds is going to necessarily make the situation better. But if you were to look at the sort of array of options for simplification in Europe, what is at the top of your hit list?
Well, indeed, I was mentioning the two overarching priorities for this mandate: security, defense, and competitiveness. And the simplification obviously fits in this competitiveness agenda, because in general we see that we do have structural problems in the European economy. Our productivity growth is slower than that of other major economies like US and China already for decades, so there is some catching up which we need to do. And that's why one of the first initiatives we came forward as a new European Commission was so-called competitiveness compass, where we outline, reforms and actions to take to address our competitiveness issues across different policy areas, and simplification is one of the key pillars on that. So on simplification, actually, we moved very quickly and strongly. So by now, we have presented already 6 simplification, so-called omnibus proposals. They range in different areas, including sustainability reporting, sustainability due diligence, agriculture, defense, small mid-caps, and so on. And there are a number of further proposals in pipeline for the next few months, including simplification omnibuses for digital and environmental requirements, on automotive, also targeted revision of REACH, which is our chemicals regulation. So all in all, we are setting the goal of reducing the administrative burden for our companies by 25% and by 35% for SMEs. And that would translate into savings of like recurring annual administrative costs of 37.5 billion euros by the end of this Commission's mandate. And the proposals which we have put on table right now would generate savings of 8.4 billion euros already. So it's annual administrative costs. Of course, it's worth noting that those are at this stage European Commission proposals. but they are still in a legislative process with EU member states, with Council, with European Parliament. So it's important that also in this legislative process, this ambition in terms of simplifying the requirements is not being lost.
This is a tactical question. Now, when I hear omnibus, I think of the U.S. legislative process and how sometimes, there can be so much gridlock in the U.S. Congress that we pack one legislative thing together like a Christmas tree and everybody gets an ornament on it. That's certainly how we pass our budgets. That being said, the government might shut down tonight. So. When trying to push through a major reform agenda, do you agree with the idea of trying to create a package? Or do you think it might be easier if you're negotiating with member states and the parliament to go progressively and not just say, this is an all or nothing kind of thing, the way, TTIP was an all or nothing kind of trade agreement?
Well, on this, so basically the approach we are following, so the intention is to stress test entire EU legislative body or EU acquis, as we call it here, and doing those stress tests, doing also engagement with stakeholders, getting feedback also from companies which how to navigate our rules, come with legislative proposals how to simplify it. And there were, broadly speaking, following the sectoral approach. So that was mentioning those various proposals. They are following different sectors. So we're not trying to mix everything together from, I don't know, from culture to agriculture. Yeah? So if it's agricultural omnibus, it's agricultural omnibus, to put simple. Okay, on this term omnibus, that actually just means a legislative technique where with one legislative proposal we amend several pieces of legislation. But somehow it now just is sticking in a context of this simplification agenda. So somehow now when we talk about omnibuses, people immediately think about simplification, even though really it's about specific type of legislative technique.
Fair enough. Are there any specific things that American counterparts have pushed that you're particularly excited about?
Well, I would say this simplification agenda and administrative burdens we are facing, they are equally important for European companies and also for foreign companies, including American companies working in Europe. So from that point of view, I would say many of the messages we are getting from European businesses and from American businesses are actually aligned, and often they point to the same problems and issues to be resolved. Obviously, there is also specific angles, like when it concerns of certain extraterritorial dimension of our legislation, like, for example, AmCham was quite active in indicating this in a context of corporate sustainability due diligence directive and so. So there are also some specific angles. And also, if you look at this EU-US joint statement in a context of the trade deal which we reached back then, also there we outline a number of things how we can work together on simplification.
It's certainly ambitious. I'm personally, when I look at the capital market situation, or we're going to call it savings and investment union, what kind of crisis has to come before the compromises are made? Right, we've been talking about it for 10 years, and whatever conference I go to in whatever city, it's the biggest fish in the pond to compete globally, to attract capital, and yes, to compete with the United States. I have friends in investment institutions in the United States that say, Europe just has to move that far and we're waiting at the gates. what I mean, I put you on the spot, provoke you a little bit. Like, what has to happen before the final compromise is made in that regard?
First of all, capital markets union, it's not something, where you need to decide one thing and make one compromise. Actually, we have already implemented 2 capital markets union action plan and are working further. And that concerns a very broad list of topics and issues to address. So, for example, ease of listing of companies, especially simplifying requirements for SMEs. Retail capital markets participation, where we frankly just lack this tradition to compare with US, whereas Europeans are great savers. So there are more than 10 trillion euros of retail savings in the EU. So we are working on this retail capital markets participation strategy, how to actually facilitate that this money is not just idling on bank accounts, but actually is put to productive use, put to the capital markets to provide also better returns for investments, because we know that in the long term capital markets do provide better returns than just bank deposits. And also with this provide funding opportunities for European companies. It's also addressing number of obstacles for cross-border finance and so on and so forth. So we're working on all of those issues, but it's a complex endeavor. So it's not that you need to reach just this one compromise and then everything is done. No, it's actually you need to work across many different policy areas.
I know. I was just trying to be a little provocative. The last question, and I think to tie us over to our next session, is you're talking about cross-border payments, a topic that's very near and dear to the heart of this conference, which is digital currency work. And you mentioned yesterday you were just speaking at a conference looking at the future of the digital euro. Now, it's no secret to anyone that in research and development and that the EU is actually light years ahead of the United States on a CBDC. Can I ask you about what the timeline might be, and how you might get consumer confidence in such a product?
Yeah. First of all, on a timeline on this digital euro. So it's already 2 years since the European Commission has tabled a legislative proposal on digital euro, and since then we are making slow but steady progress, and indeed we think it's important now to accelerate this work. So we welcome the ambition of Danish presidency of the EU to have a common approach of EU member states or Council by the end of this year. So European Parliament is also advancing their work, so one can expect their position on digital euro somewhere in spring next year, and then we can start the actual negotiations between the institutions, so-called trilogues. So I think it would be realistic to assume that during the course of next year we could actually finalize this legislative work, and then what European Central Bank is saying that once the legislative work is finalized and once it provides clarity on number of important elements on design of the digital euro, they need maybe some 5 years before the actual introduction of the digital euro. So that's more or less the timelines which we are talking. In terms of confidence, well, first of all, here, when we talk about digital euro, it's a way of bringing central bank money into 21st century. So it's digital equivalent, basically, of euro coins and banknotes. So, and obviously, central bank money is the safest form of money. So the question is probably a bit opposite, that we will be actually limiting the store of value function of digital euro, not to allow for disintermediation, not to have negative effects on a banking sector, so that banks can continue to play their role on providing credit to the economy, so not to create financial stability issues. Another element on confidence, what consumers and what people demand is a high level of privacy, and there indeed we had been preparing this digital euro proposal with those privacy considerations in mind, and it will provide higher level of privacy than current digital payments. In a sense, the central bank will know less about those transactions than currently commercial banks or credit card scheme providers know. And third, but okay, it's also not complete unanimity. There's also, anti-money laundering framework, counter-terrorist financing, also addressing fraud risk and so. And third important element is whether digital euro is there kind of not to take away cash. And on this we have been very clear. So in parallel with our digital euro proposal, we also tabled a proposal on legal tender status for cash, actually reinforcing the legal status of cash, making it obligation for euro area member states to ensure sufficient availability and sufficient acceptance of cash so that it can fulfill this legal tender function. So those probably are three key topics for the public debate on digital euro.
Will you be one of the first users?
Certainly I do hope that we will bring this project to the successful conclusion, and looking forward for using it.
Me too. Thank you, Commissioner, for taking the time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.